Welcome to the Next Pivot Point podcast. This season, I am focused on sharing stories and ideas from global experts on diversity and inclusion. My purpose is to share diverse stories so that you can learn from others' lived experiences and walk away with actionable strategies to lead even more inclusively. I share this information because inclusive leadership is a journey. It requires bravery and courage, and you do not have to do it alone. At Next Pivot Point, I believe we are stronger together as allies. Let's meet this week's guest. Welcome to this week's episode of the Next Pivot Point podcast. I am thrilled to have a new friend and ally with me today. Jeff Nischwitz is known as a snow globe shaker, shaking things up, who's on a mission to help people shift how they lead and thereby shift their leadership impact. He's an international speaker and personal transformation coach, best known for his unique perspectives, challenging traditional thinking. I can attest to that, in delivering tangible shifts for leaders to grow their people, build their businesses, and enhance their relationships. Jeff's the founder of Nischwitz Group, a speaking, consulting, and coaching company that transforms people and organizations one truth at a time. Jeff has published 4 leadership and business books, including his most recent, Just One Step, Walking Backwards to the Present on the Camino Trail. Jeff, I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you, Julie. I am so looking forward to this conversation.
Well, our conversations began a few months back, just kind of meet and greet, get to know each other in this pandemic world as we're all trapped inside our home offices. And it was fun to get to know you, get to know your business, how you help your clients and compare notes, be on your podcast as well. And so we talked about some pretty heavy stuff on that one. I'm sure we'll talk about some heavy stuff today. And I know, for you being on this journey of what I call an ally and understanding your privileges as a white male here in the United States, I just thought it'd be so important to share your story with our listeners, because I think it's one that all too many people feel and experienced what you experienced and how you've embraced kind of coming on this journey of allyship. So Jeff, tell us kind of your aha moment that you had a few years ago, what it's been like since.
Yeah, Julie, I'd love to tell you it's been a decades-long journey. But the only way it's been a decades-long journey is the fact that I was asleep for most of it. I can pinpoint a time that it really began for me. It probably was a little sooner, but I would say it was about 4 years ago. Actually, coming up on 5, I went to a training program, a training weekend on multiculturalism. And we went through an exercise there where we were looking at privilege, and we were looking at target and non-target groups, most of them unearned, some of them earned. And we did this little calculation where it was 15 categories. And then you wrote on your name tag your number. And I was a 13-2. And 13-2 means I was in 13 of the privileged or non-target groups and only 2 of the target groups. And I felt like those were almost cheating, because one of them is that I have some hearing deficiencies. I now have a hearing aid. I didn't then, which I felt like was almost cheating to say I'm not fully abled. And the other one was I'm over 40, which I'm like, really, I don't feel any effect of that. So I will tell you, my reaction was shame, which wasn't healthy in a lot of ways, because I found myself beating myself up for a period of time of saying, because I think initially it was anger, actually. Initially it was anger to say, hey, I didn't do this. It's not my fault that I was born 6 foot, that I'm 6'4", I'm white, Protestant Catholic, all these things, born here, first language here. It's not my fault. But no one was saying it was except me. So I came out of that in shame. And I'll do the brief version. I know we'll dig in deeper, but the transition has been a lot of shame, which led to a lot of anger. And the anger, well, the shame part was anger directed at me. The other part was my anger came out at others, particularly people who I judged to be completely asleep on this issue. And I found myself wanting to be the rescuer, the hero. And then let's just translate to what it really meant is I was falling into the trap of being the white knight, literally. I'm going to save everybody because now I'm the white dude and I am privileged. So you know what? I'm going to use that privilege and just change everybody's mind and went off on everybody and saw that, well, that didn't work so well. And so, fast forward, it's a continuing journey. I continue to grow on myself, enhance my awareness, whether it's reading something, listening to a podcast, putting myself in an uncharted territory on this podcast, uh, having conversations with all kinds of people of difference. And I guess the big shift for me is I feel anger from time to time, but I do a pretty good job of not unleashing that on others. I'm not here to save anyone. I'm gradually learning every day what it means to be an ally. Um, and most of the time it means me just stepping into situations and talking about myself versus judging others.
Yeah. Well, that's a journey. I mean, it starts with shame, defensiveness, right? Which I often share. Shame's not going to get people into the conversation. Like, I wish that strategy worked, but most of the time, just what you experience. Well, this isn't my fault. I didn't do anything to deserve this. I've worked hard, that kind of rhetoric. It triggers, and that's defensiveness. But then once we realize, like you said, no one said that but me. So maybe I need to do some work. Now I'm going to save everyone. I'm going to be the white savior, the white knight, the story that we've heard so many times in fairy tales and in our media about white men saving people of color and women. And that's not helpful, right? Because then we just need white men more and it's
All
not
right. Yep.
sustainable. So it's fun that you had those ahas on your own and have done the hard work of education along the way, the podcast, the books. I talk about the diversity dictionary terms, just getting comfortable with some of these terms, because if you're in the majority group, you don't really have to learn this stuff, unfortunately, for now. So choosing to do that is really fun. I'm curious, Jeff, how has it shown up for you? When I think about my journey, and very much the same with race, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I got really curious about anti-racism and racism work. And so I can align with like kind of where I went, where I started. Yeah, it's like white guilt. And it was like, oh, I'm going to save Black people. And now I know much better than that. And to listen and to share my own perspectives from time to time, but to listen. I'm curious, as I went through this journey, I really think it's helped me be a better human being, like a better parent, a better caregiver, a better partner, a better friend. Like, how has it shown up for you? What have been the benefits to joining the diversity cause?
Well, I'm an oddball, so this first part may seem part of the crazy part of me compared to the rest of the world. One of the benefits is it has made me incredibly uncomfortable. And when I'm incredibly uncomfortable, that's when I learn the most. Because one thing, I guess, the gift I'll give myself is to say, I've chosen to be a person that when I'm uncomfortable, I try and understand it versus resist it and learn from it. Like you said, I started off saying I was really angry about, things being put on me, but no one was. And I think a lot of people actually stopped there. But for me, I said, well, wait a minute. If no one's really saying that to me, except in maybe in the public sphere, maybe, but on an interpersonal level, they're not. So I started asking myself, why am I so defensive? Well, if I'm defensive, then I have to be defensive for my own reasons, not what someone else said. And so I realized, oh, I'm just angry at myself. So I know this, it's made me a better listener. It's made me a better leader. It's made me a better person. It's made me a better advocate. It has made me knowledge and awareness and education has allowed me to be more courageous. And I'll tell you, I'm hesitant to say that because even saying that is hard to say, because I say courageous in that I speak up a lot more than I ever did. I'd love to say I speak up every time, and I don't, but I speak up a lot more. And I want to call that courage, but I think about the people I may be speaking up around or for, or the idea. It's absurd. And I used to say I was looking for places to have safe conversations about this topic, and someone called me out, and I'm grateful they did. They said, really, Jeff, you're talking about safety when others are dealing with physical safety? I said, wow, yeah. How it was almost saying, no, I didn't beat myself up. I said, wow, there's some more privilege, Jeff. You're looking for a safe conversation. People are looking for a safe life. So it's made me more empathetic, more compassionate. It's caused me to dig deeper into myself and a lot of history too to understand. And I've been very intentional about seeking out uncomfortable places. And, last year I went and did a full weekend or workshop on that was all about racism. And it was uncomfortable. And I will say this, I continue to live by some words that a white friend of mine said a few years ago. It really helped. He said, Jeff, there's no right answers here. There's he said there's right and wrong in this, yes, but he said there's no right way. There's ways we try out, and it's going to work for most people, but not everybody. You don't have to be perfect. The only question is, do you care enough to let it and you be messy and just stay in the struggle and be okay that you're going to mess up, and don't, because if you try and get it perfect, now you're not really going to be, you're not going to be an ally if you're trying to make it perfect, because allyship is, what I'm learning, is really messy and uncertain and risky.
Yeah, if you're doing it well, it's risky, right? If you're doing it
Yeah.
safe, I used to say, well, this is a safe place for a conversation. And if you remember, there used to be those little safe place signs that people would put up. Kind of, it is like childlike almost. And it's unrealistic to think we can have this perfectly safe conversation because, to your point, there's discomfort, there's bravery, there's courage involved here. And that's when we're learning the most. So it may not feel perfectly safe, but I call them brave conversations now that we can really
I like
bring
that
our full
term, by the
self.
way. I really like that from your podcast with us.
It helps. I think and you don't have to do it alone. And as human beings, we're really wired for connection. We're wired to feel a sense of belonging. We're tribal species. We're not meant to survive independently. And so we're always like taking these cues from others around us. Can I be safe? Am I safe here? Right? Can I be my full self? So I need to monitor who I am and tone it down or tone it up depending on who I'm around. And all of this is instinctual. We don't even think about it, how taxing it is to be the other. But as somebody that has the privilege, like that's just, those are some extra hoopla things you don't have to think about. I'm curious, Jeff, I know you're having a lot of brave conversations with friends, with colleagues, with clients. How does it come across? Because I'm always curious how, when it comes out of a white man's mouth, there's a difference, I think, than a woman or person of color or somebody with a disability sharing something. Because it's like, well, what does Jeff have to gain from this? What have you observed when you're bringing up this conversation? How do people tend to react to you?
Huh. A lot of different ways. I mean, I've experienced everything from silence to literally asking that question, why is this your issue? Um, often I'll get a lot of, I consider it rationalization. Uh, One thing I've chosen to do to try and, because my goal, and I'd love to say I want to change the world, but that's not my goal. My goal is, in each conversation, to share something with someone that maybe causes them to think differently and just reflect on something. And one of the things I've done to maybe, and I think for the most part, I don't get in a lot of arguments, call them arguments. Because one thing I don't do is I don't put my judgments on others. So for example, if I hear someone say something that, 3 years ago I would have said, well, just you saying that reflects your privilege. That's exactly what I've said, or worse. Well, now what I'll typically say is, for me, I used to think this, but then I started to realize this. And for me, what's really true is that I'm realizing that I have inherently racist views. Most of them are unconscious, but there's some that are conscious. And I've taken a look. So I keep using the word I, and what I feel, uh, because my hope is that people then will maybe hear it versus getting in a position to defend against my accusations, my judgments, my attacks. I guess I believe this, Julie. I believe that I and anyone who are in whatever the non-target group is, the privileged group, has an opportunity to be a unique voice. Because while I realize it's not my job to save everyone. My voice is important because the target group, the non-privileged group, ultimately I don't think can change things on their own. It doesn't make sense. And I was at a conference probably a year and a half ago, and it was a panel of women talking about, this issue, especially with women in the workforce. And I asked the question, it's near the end of Q&A, and I said, well, what's my role in this as a man? And it was interesting. Someone on the panel said, I'm glad you asked that. We're a little surprised no one else did, because that's the most important conversation here in a room that's 80% men. Because we as women can speak up all day long. But if there are not men who are willing to speak up as well, it's a heavy road. Because frankly, for the most part, you're still in power.
Yep.
So how is things going to change if men don't change? So yeah, I think I've had a wide range of reaction, and I continue to plug in. And I think the thing that, what's a good word for this? Not haunts, but troubles me. I can't remember the woman's name. I heard a video probably in the last year during 2020, and she was talking about allyship, and she used a really interesting metaphor. She was referring to an example of taking down a Confederate flag. And what she said is, some people think that allyship is saying, hey, I support you climbing up there and taking down that flag. But she said allyship is crossing the fence and holding the flagpole while I climb up there and take it down.
Yep.
And so I always think about in moments, and I reflect later to say, did I put my hand on the flagpole then? Or was I just across the street cheering them on?
Oh, that's a great metaphor.
And it's just been a really good visual for me.
Yeah. It really symbolizes what I'd call active allyship. There's a lot of performative allyship being thrown around. And you can see that whether it's like Martin Luther King Day or Black History Month or Women's History Month, like sharing quotes and like doing things on social media. Like, where are you the rest of the year? Like, what are you doing? And that's not always the most helpful thing to do. And then people are like, see, I can't get it right. But I think what you're talking about is not just observing, not just doing it when it's cool, but doing it when it's hard, and really being supportive in a way that you can uniquely help somebody, whether it's your privilege, your voice. We all have some source of privilege. So I love that. That's a great story, Jeff. Yeah, I'm wondering, we talked about some heavy stuff before, and I'm curious what you think of the state of something like white supremacy. Like, why do you think that scares white people so much? And I find too, you layer that with the patriarchy, those things together is like really sticky and hard, and it just gets people fired up and tends to elicit some defensiveness. But, given the events of this year, what are your thoughts?
I look at it like a continuum. Okay. So the continuum is, and a lot of this, and I would have, by the way, I would have had different views 4 or 5 years ago because I wouldn't have thought about it, or the way I didn't have this opening. Like, we realize today, the so-called label of racism, that word, for a lot of people is horrific and ugly, because I believe they equate it to they're a bad person. They have this really conscious, visceral, negative belief about someone different. And because of that, I think that's one of our biggest obstacles, because, it took me a long time to be willing to say that I am a racist. I'd have to do an inventory to say today, are there any conscious racist beliefs? Probably still are, but it wasn't top of mind. It wasn't any dark stuff, but I didn't want to say that out loud because it felt so horrible. So the continuum is, if we're going to talk about that, now I believe that, I have a lot of unconscious biases that are racist, and a lot of those are systemic and institutional, but I have taken them on. That counts as racism. It's not that personal hatred belief. But now we take white supremacy on that continuum that I would say, in terms of deflection and defensiveness, is even further over here. Like, oh my God, I might be willing to acknowledge that I'm a racist, but no way I'm a white supremacist, because what is a white supremacist? A white supremacist wears hoods,
Yep.
Hangs people, burns crosses, because that's what we've been taught, by the way. That's the problem with our history. We were taught that that's what that is, partly because people didn't know better, partly because it was a simplified version of history. But when I look at what white supremacy really means, it is based upon a belief that whites are inherently better than blacks. That's all it means. That's all it means. And for someone to say, I don't think that at all, even unconsciously, first of all, that's naive because no one on this planet, not one person, knows all of their unconscious beliefs. That's my struggle with that.
Yeah.
Nobody knows that. I would never say I don't have an unconscious belief because it's unconscious. But if you think about the history of what that means, that belief that whites are better than black is so deeply embedded in our history and our story. And like when people say, well, we got over that, I go, when did that happen? When we ended slavery? No, go read your history. Spend about 5 minutes on it. You'll find out that's not true. Well, the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s, go read your history. That was about rights. It wasn't about white supremacist beliefs.
No.
And so it's so deeply embedded. It's like if you think about water that has been poisoned in some way. And let's not even say it's poison. Let's say you put dye in water and it gets in the water. Unless you have a pill that makes it go away, which we don't when it comes to white racism and white supremacy, the only way that it starts to get less infiltrated is over time as we flush it with unfiltrated water that's not been contaminated. And we still just got a long way to go. The river is still contaminated, and it's contaminated with these beliefs. And I'll tell you, it's still hard for me. But when I understand that basic, simple definition of white supremacy, this belief that whites are in any way better, in fact, that whites are significantly different, when in fact they're not. We used to have, they've had scientists who did research to prove that they were different and made stuff up.
Right.
And now we know it's,
say like the brain size was like smaller.
Oh,
sorts of
they
stuff
literally made stuff up to support the belief. Because if you study your history, it's because people felt bad. Some people felt bad. They said, well, I won't feel so bad if it's actually true. So now I'm justified in the different treatment. So it's still a hard word for me. But when I understand it that simply, I can acknowledge, yes, I come from that belief system within our culture. And there's elements, even little ones, that I catch myself.
Yeah.
Martin Luther King is a great example. Until a few years ago, I used to make fun of the holiday. I not only didn't just highlight it that day, I made fun of it. I was like, well, we got this holiday, but only banks and government buildings are closed. So is it really a holiday? No one else is off for it. Never thinking about, wow, isn't that interesting? Nothing else is closed that day. Why is that? Because it's not really being honored and respected.
Yep.
By whom? Corporate America, which is run by predominantly white males. Never connected the dots. And now I go, oh yeah, there it is. There it is again.
Yeah.
There it is again.
There's that white supremacy showing up again. And I think you make a really good point, Jeff, that I remember early on in my journey when I read the book White Fragility, that was kind of my big wake up call. And she talks really openly about white supremacy and the definition you just shared, just inherent beliefs that white is better than black. And I was like, I certainly don't believe that. And then as she shared stories, much like you say, it's like, well, here's something I experienced, or here's someone in my training that said this. I'm like, oh, I've thought that. Oh, I've done that. And then you're like, oh, mirror, I don't like what I see. I don't want to be this bad person, right? To your point. And then unpacking it a little bit further, when I hear really, it could be anything like subtle to something egregious that's a signal that you might have some white supremacy thinking going on. We know that, people are likely to say if we diversify talent pools, right? Who doesn't want diverse talent right now? It's never been so competitive. But then there's this undercurrent of like, but we don't want to lower the standards. It's like, what is that assuming there? Is that assuming white candidates are smarter and better than black? I think that's what I just heard, right? And so really unpacking people's unconscious thoughts that come across in these statements that signal that people don't belong if you're different. So I agree with everything you just said, Jeff. And I think it's awesome that you're really, willing to be vulnerable about this stuff because, yeah, Martin Luther King Day, I never celebrated it until I learned the full story. And the full history of Dr. King, by the way, is not taught in our history books. And why is that, right? Why don't we know about his demands for reparations and economic change? And that's when it became really problematic. The white man did not like that at all. Sure, you can have your voting rights and we'll keep you quiet with the Civil Rights Act and things like that. But once things got really real, he became a real threat to white supremacy. That's when his legacy was cut short. And it's terrible when you learn these things that I thought I was being educated like accurately in school. Like, no, I wasn't. I was being told the version of history that people wanted me to know. So this journey is
Comfortable history.
I'm curious, Jeff, like what tools you mentioned, like you've read books, podcasts, like what things have been most helpful for you on your journey?
I'd have to say all of them because they're all differently impactful. I also read, I think it was actually just early 2020. It was either 2019 or 2020. I read White Fragility. I'm glad I read it when I did because I was really open, because I was imagining how that would have landed for me 2 or 3 years earlier. So I was just really open to it. And so I continue to get, I will say this, I continue to read more and more challenging books as part of it. I don't do the ones that are probably going to be the same. I read the books that appear to be a stronger message. I'm not saying whether I fully agree or not in any of them, but it's me saying, I just want to continue to push deeper. Like I just finished a book. I'm about to finish a book that really was challenging and called Stamped from the Beginning.
Oh yeah. Ibram Kendi. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It just totally reframed history and actually to me, just finally told some truth about it. And it's hard stuff to read. But I do that. I find that going to a workshop is interactive and it's an opportunity to have an exchange with other people with a common commitment to growth. I love individual conversations. I learn a lot from them. I've learned a lot from listening to podcasts, from doing my own podcast, having guests like you on to talk about this. And I think the other thing for me is just continuing to listen and to pause enough to look at situations and say, I wonder if this is in there, because it makes me laugh when I say this. I had this epiphany in late 2019 or early 20. So it's pretty recent. And I said to myself one day as I was watching a video or something, why am I taking my guidance, not fully at the time, but a lot of guidance from whites about racism? I'll be blunt. It started funny because I was seeing other people were sending me videos, my white friends saying, look what this was said. Or they would send me a video of one black person who said, there's no such thing as systemic racism. And that's when I went, well, you know what? I'm not going to listen anymore. Like when this is an aside, but it's related to this issue. It happened to do with Native Americans. I have a big heart for Native American stories.
Yeah, ditto.
And I've studied the history and how we so mistreated them and tried to assimilate them.
Thanksgiving is so problematic for me.
Oh my God, it is. And I struggle with it because if you think about the reality of what's happening and the fact that with the Native Americans, we basically said, we'd love to welcome you. You just have to be like us. You have to learn our language. You have to go to our schools. You have to become Christian. And if you do that, we're good. Otherwise, we're going to put you out here. Like, oh my God. So anyway, I was thinking about the context of the Native American struggle with this whole issue of difference. And look at that. I just got up in the story. I got so angry. I lost the story. Gosh, I hate this when it happens.
No. I mean, I get fired up about this stuff too. So if it comes back to you, Jeff, just let
I
us
think
know.
it was something I was watching or reading. Um, in terms of the listening, that people will say things. Oh, I know it was. I posted some. That's what it was. I posted something about Indigenous Americans Day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was it was not like a nice comment. It was, hey, let's pay attention to history. And someone wrote me this really long note on social media about, with all due respect, why do you have to keep beating up on everybody? It's not, and he said something like, it's not like we committed genocide. Like,
kind of.
I don't know. We had blankets that we knew were filled with smallpox and we gave them to the natives. I don't know what we call that. And we wiped out. So I just remember thinking that when I say someone who's not Native American saying, I think we've talked about this enough. And what I wrote was, I'll be ready to listen when a massive number of Native Americans tell me it's time to stop talking about this.
Exactly.
I'll be ready to listen with a massive number of Black Americans say, it's time. We don't need to talk about this anymore. Not one or two.
No.
And I realize how many people love to latch on to one voice.
Right.
That's the voice in power.
Yeah. Well, and you think about, as white people, I remind myself, it's not my job to weigh in on racial issues if I haven't been affected by them. My job is to listen. My job is to understand. Same with Native American challenges or the LGBTQ plus community. Like, I don't get to weigh in on that because I don't have those lived experiences, to your point. And I often, one of the first things I say when someone says something like, people love to say things like racism doesn't exist or gender is binary, there's no in between. Like, have you talked to somebody that experiences that, about that? And usually, almost always, 99% of the time, like, well, no. Well, then I don't think you can have a valid opinion yet because you don't understand it. It's just a simple way to get someone to be like, okay. Maybe there's more truth to this after all. Maybe I'm basing my thoughts on my emotions and not actual experiences or facts, which is all too common that we see that every day. Jeff, it's been so fun to talk with you. I know we're kind of at the end of our time together today. Thanks for sharing your journey. Thanks for talking so openly about hard topics like vulnerability and shame and defensiveness and not getting it right and figuring it out and stumbling along the way, because that's what an ally does. There's no perfect ally. We are waiting forever for white men to show up in this conversation perfect. We will wait forever. That's what I have to say. Like, they're never going to be perfect. So let's just meet them where they're at. And you're certainly much further along in the journey. I know these words will inspire others to come onto the journey. But tell our listeners before you go, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, I'm pretty easy to find as long as you can spell my name. I'm blessed with an unusual last name because it's spelled Nischwitz. If you search Jeff Nischwitz, you'll find me. But my website is nischwitzgroup.com. You can find me on all the social media platforms. At least Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and, connect to me, reach out, have a conversation. I'm very open to conversations, whatever the topic is.
Yep, I can definitely.
I'm ready to learn more every day.
And he comes right out of the gate, just like he did today on the podcast. I remember you told me about the privilege walk, like the second minute that we were talking. I was like, whoa, okay, we're going there. I love it. So we need more bold voices out there in the world like yours. Thank you for sharing your story with us today. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, Julie. It was my pleasure as well.
I appreciate you listening to this episode. If you like this podcast, the best way you can be an ally is to write a review on iTunes, on Spotify, on Google, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Every review helps other allies find us. I host this podcast because I believe we are stronger together as allies.